What's going on, everybody? It is your boy Dylan Mathews alongside the man, the myth, the legend himself, Beau Morgan, and we are Peachtree Football. Make sure you like this podcast, download the podcast, subscribe to Peachtree Football. We are wherever you get your podcast. That is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Audacy app, wherever you get your podcast. Peachtree Football is there. Beau Morgan, what's going on? It's a Tuesday afternoon, evening, almost 5 o'clock type deal. So some people might even start eating dinner around this time, early dinner munchers. But anywho, how you doing on this Tuesday, Beau?
I'm good, man. We're kind of entering these dog days of summer. I believe next week. I think next week is mini camp, which is mandatory. This week is the last really week of OTAs, which are non-mandatory. And it's once mini camp is over, it kind of gets real.
Facts.
4th of July is kind of a turning point in the year, because for me, it's kind of like, all right, now I've got to start looking ahead because the season is upon us. And so it's weird how quickly it goes, because we're just a week removed from Memorial Day, and now we're almost to the actual 100% off season for the players. That 1 month they get where they kind of, have to work out, but they're free of team activities.
Yeah, it's getting close and it's ramping up, and it's going to be here before you know it. Soon we'll be talking about, man, the Hall of Fame game is next week, and then it'll be like, man, training camp is about to start. And then sooner or later we'll be talking about and breaking down and reacting to what we see in the preseason. So it's all coming up fast, but it is a good thing that the NFL season is coming sooner rather than later. Beau, the first thing I want to touch on, I want to get into a ranking I saw by Gordon McGinnis and Pro Football Focus. They were ranking teammates in the top 32, specifically teammates in the top 32 when it comes to interior defensive linemen. I'm going to quickly give you the list because we got a trio of Atlanta Falcons on this list. So for the Giants, they have Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams on this list. So these are all teammates who, when it comes to interior defensive linemen, are ranked in the top 32 according to Pro Football Focus. So for the Giants, Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams. For the Colts, DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart. For the Washington Commanders, Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne. These are all good names, good players. Christian Wilkins and Zach Sealer for the Miami Dolphins. For the Cincinnati Bengals, DJ Reader and BJ Hill. For the San Francisco 49ers, Javon Hargrave and Eric Armstead. For the Buffalo Bills, Ed Oliver, who just got paid. Poona Ford and Daquan Jones. And for the Atlanta Falcons, Beau Morgan, Calais Campbell, David Onyemata, and Grady Jarrett. So besides the Buffalo Bills, we're the only team on this list to have 3 names. With that being said, Beau, right now, without having seen them come together, do you think, at least on paper, this defensive line with teammates in the top 32 with Calais Campbell, Grady Jarrett, and David Onyemata, you throw in Arnold Ebiketie, you throw in Bud Dupree, you throw in Lorenzo Carter, is this team, Taquan Graham as well, don't want to forget anybody, but is this defensive line a top 15 defensive line right now? Do you see them that highly, or am I getting a little bit crazy?
I mean, God, I hate that. I hate to say anything, because as soon as you do, and then he doesn't love something. But yeah, I think there's certainly that likelihood. There's certainly that chance. There's certainly that potential that this team could be. You got to stay healthy, or you got to do all that. You got to play to your potential. But yeah, absolutely. Lorenzo Carter's in there. Taquan Graham's in there. I don't know if you remember Taquan. I'm just looking at I actually had pulled this up outside of you, but Calais Campbell, Onyemata, Grady Jarrett, you mentioned those guys, and we're really just talking about those guys. Well, let's go deeper. I mean, the second team right now is, depending on how things hash out in training camp in the preseason, but Taquan Graham, Eddie Goldman, who's making his return after signing with the team, then retiring. I mean, and you got Timmy Horn who can move a little bit, a bigger dude. So, yeah, I think there's absolute potential this could be a top 15, top 10 maybe defensive line. You got to remember Calais Campbell's not going to play just a ton of snaps, but he is going to play. And so I do think that's important. He's going to play some important snaps, I should say. So I just think that the potential is that they could be very, very good. I don't want to put something on them necessarily, but there is a huge potential of this team being a top 10, top 15 defensive line, and they just got to go out and perform. I mean, Grady Jarrett to me, is a guy who's just on the cusp of being mentioned with the Aaron Donalds of the world. So the Vita Veas of the world, the Ed Olivers, those top interior defensive linemen. I think he's going to be even better when you add guys like Calais Campbell next to him. So, and David Onyemata, because he won't be eating as many double teams now with those guys in there. So, yeah, I'm very excited about what this defensive line could be.
I'm excited about just the depth of this defensive line, because it seemed like this defensive line for the last few years was very top heavy. You had Grady in there, and you would have some other guys next to Grady, but you never really had what you thought was a super deep defensive line. This defensive line this year is deep. You mentioned it. I mean, to start out, you'd be putting out Calais Campbell, Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata. Then you're going to have Lorenzo Carter, Arnold Ebiketie on the edge. But then those guys are going to get rotated in with Bud Dupree in the mix. Taquan Graham's going to be in the mix. He's going to get a lot of snaps. So Timmy Horn, Eddie Goldman. I mean, the depth of this defensive line is going to be something serious. And just being able to have those fresh legs, and they're going to not just be fresh legs. They're going to be fresh legs of guys who have performed well in this league for, a number of years. So that's what makes it really exciting, just the depth of this defensive line, and how we're going to have guys, we're going to have dudes coming at opposing offensive lines just every single snap. And it's really going to be an onslaught when you talk about the pressure that this Atlanta Falcons football team should be able to create. So if we're talking about how good this Falcons defensive line can be this season, a lot, when I say a lot has to go right, when we're talking about a top 10 defensive line, guys obviously have to stay healthy. That's going to be a big factor. And obviously, they're going to have to hit the ground running when you talk about adjusting to Ryan Nielsen's defense. And Grady Jarrett actually talked about that in this last round of OTAs, how, they're going hard in OTAs to try and really hit the ground running during training camp. So they're going to have to get off to a hot start as well. But this defensive line has definitely the potential to be a top 10, maybe even like top 8 defensive line, just because of the depth they have. And again, they don't only have depth, but they have some heavy hitters at the top of that defensive line as well. So just like you, I'm excited to see what this Falcons defensive line can do, because we haven't had a consistent pass rush in a long time. I mean, you could say 2016, because we definitely had Vic Beasley, who led the league in sacks that year. But, it kind of seemed like that maybe was I hate to say fluke year. And even before that, it was kind of, early 2010s where we had go ahead.
That wasn't a fluke year. I think what people always miss about that year is that Vic played on a defense that was playing with a lead a lot. So he was able to pin his ears back and go.
Good point.
And teams were always chasing them. And I think the other thing is a majority of his sack, he did a good job of second chance sacks, where initially he doesn't get there, but they're able to hold off and then maybe get there. And also, I think 9 of those sacks came against 3 teams. So I don't want to say it was a fluke. He earned them, but but it was definitely wasn't a fluke. I just think that was what Vic could have been, and then he never was hungry enough to get back there, unfortunately.
Right. And then to your point too, that 2017 team was a completely different team when they were really reliant upon their defense more so than their offense in 2016. That was a really good defensive team, and the offense kind of took a step back once Shanahan left for San Fran. So definitely a point there. But again, there hasn't been that consistency that you want on the defensive line for some years now. So hopefully we get that, and hopefully we get in a big way this season. But I want to spend most of this podcast getting into some battles we could start to see develop in training camp. So I have a couple that I'm looking out for, but I want to first get your take. What training camp battles do you think are really going to transpire? What do you think are the biggest training camp battles and the biggest competition going into training camp this year?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you look at things. Personally, I want to see the defensive back issues.
Yeah.
Is Jeff Okudah gonna win that right cornerback spot, or could you see maybe Mike Hughes battle him for it? And I know that originally when Mike Hughes was brought here, that it was like, oh, he's going to slide and play that nickel spot. But maybe now with the addition of Clark Phillips through the draft, that's something Clark Phillips. I want to see how the cornerback spot opposite A.J. Terrell and the nickel position play out. So to me, that secondary is going to have a thing. I expect Richie Grant to be the starting strong safety with the addition of Jesse Bates, and I think Jalen Hawkins will probably be the second guy there. So there's that one, and I'll go with the second one before we get to yours.
Yeah.
But what happens in the linebacker room? I expect Troy Anderson and Caden Ellis to be your inside linebackers, depending on how they run things. But if they are looking at staying with the 3-4, which I was led to believe that would be quote unquote their base, even though they're going to have so many different fronts, multiple fronts, which I was also told. I expect those two, but what happens with Michael Walker? Is he able to push one of those guys? Because I know that Ryan Nielsen was huge on Troy Anderson when he came here, and obviously Caden Ellis is someone he's big on because he brought him in here with him. So that's a room that I'm looking at as well, where how some of those battles kind of could line up.
You hit the nail on the head with the defensive backs. That has to be the number one position group. Every Falcons fan needs to have their eyes on is the cornerback spot, because again, is Jeff Okudah going to prove himself to be that other guy that lines up on the outside on Sundays across from A.J. Terrell? You would like him to be. You brought him in so he could be that. And he just has to prove that, he can be that dude. He can stay healthy. He can stay on the field. He can perform at a high level and, play up to the potential that, he was supposed to have and has with as being the number 3 overall pick back in 2020. And then in that slot position, I think that could be, I think Clark Phillips could really give Mike Hughes a run for his money. And like you said, I don't want to discredit Mike Hughes. He could give Jeff Okudah a run for his money in that other outside spot. But I think it could be a real battle between Mike Hughes and Clark Phillips for that nickel spot. So that's going to be interesting to watch out for. You gave one that I think could be a little bit more of a battle between Richie Grant and Jalen Hawkins. Now, the expectation definitely is for Richie Grant to win that safety spot next to Jesse Bates, because Richie Grant was a 2nd overall pick. If I'm not mistaken, the Falcons, they traded back. I'm sorry, they traded back. I was going to say trade up, but they traded back and actually got Richie Grant. But still, 2nd round pick. And this is a guy who you want to start seeing take leaps every single season. He definitely made a step up last season from year 1 to year 2. Now going from year 2 to year 3, you expect him to really make some big development leaps, and you want to see him contribute. But I don't want to discredit Jalen Hawkins. And I know you weren't discrediting Jalen Hawkins. I'm not saying that, but I think
Well, a
Jalen
little
Hawkins.
bit. A little bit. But go ahead. I'll let you finish
Yeah.
on Jalen Hawkins, and I want to chime back in on that.
I think Jalen Hawkins could be a little bit more competition to Richie Grant than maybe suggested. Now, again, I think Richie Grant will end up winning that position, but I think it'll be a little bit a tighter competition between Jalen Hawkins and Richie Grant.
Yeah, look, I don't think Jalen Hawkins. Jesse Bates is here because they didn't believe in Jalen Hawkins.
True.
And let me put it this way. I do not care what the company line is with, hey, we play the best players. Richie Grant was your second round draft pick in your first draft class.
For sure.
He got better as year one went on in a difficult defense. He got better in year two. Still made some mistakes, but got better. I would be shocked if another regime's draft pick was starting over this regime's draft pick come opening weekend against the Saints. Shocked. I just don't. Sorry. I'm sorry. Excuse me, against the Panthers.
Just what it is.
I don't know why I said the Saints. The Panthers. I apologize. Sorry, but no, I don't believe it. I just don't think it's a possibility. Unless there's an injury. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I just don't see it happening. I really don't. And I'm not trying to be a Mr. Know-it-all or Mr. all that, that guy. You don't go sign guys for that big of contracts if you believe the other guy is the guy. And it would be a change of position for Jalen Hawkins as well. So I think the writing's on the wall where he'll be a future backup, or possibly he's going to be looking for a new team after this season.
It's definitely going to be CJ, but that is a good point that you make about the change of position, because he would, if he slotted over to play that position that Richie Grant was going to play, he would be it's a safety, but he'd be out of position between strong safety and free safety. But the other position battle I'm also looking at what is going to transpire when it comes to, honestly, that all right, we know Matt Collins and Drake London, they should be 1 and 2 when it comes to wide receivers. And I know Kyle Pitts, Cordell Patterson, they're going to be in that conversation too, because they're going to play a lot of wide receiver. But when we're maybe talking about just true wide receivers, because Cordell Patterson's going to do a little bit of everything. Kyle Pitts going to play tight end and wide receiver. But we're looking at just strictly people who play, guys who are going to play wide receiver. Drake London, Matt Collins are going to be, those top two guys. Scotty Miller is going to play in that slot. But, who's going to be maybe that other guy that emerges? Is there going to be another guy that emerges? I mean, because you think about it, you maybe aren't pressed if a guy emerges out of that kind of second tier group or not, between the Slade Boldens and maybe the Penny Harts, who I think will do some return things as well, and those guys. So I'm kind of looking to see who's going to emerge out of that group and kind of gets in that kind of first wide receiver tier, and maybe becomes that third guy, that third option or fourth option. So I'm kind of looking at that.
I'll give you a name to mix in there. I think Scotty Miller's got the inside track to that. I'm not going to sit here and BS you. I think he's got the inside track. But a guy that everyone seems to forget about that's still on this roster and still on this team, and who will be returning punts, and his name ain't J.J. Arcia Whiteside. His name's not Penny Hart. His name's not Frank Darby or Slade Bolden.
Are you going Kadero Hodge here?
No. His name is Avery Williams.
Oh,
and Avery Williams has been played running back for this team.
Yeah,
he's a core special teamer who they would love to keep on the roster because of what he does on special teams, and not just returning kicks, but on kickoff kickoff coverage and punt coverage. And I know he's been working out at wide receiver.
Wow, okay.
He's done some things there. So Avery Williams is a guy that I think you could see use as well. I also think that the third receiver spot is going to be one that is an all hands on deck. Well, I think Scotty Miller has the inside track to be, quote unquote, the third receiver.
Right.
I think there'll be games where Cordero Patterson, Avery Williams, Bijan Robinson, Scotty Miller, some of these guys, they get significant time in that slot role or in that third receiver role, just because of things like, we've heard about how Bijan has said that Arthur's going to use him in all ways, and Drake London is like, oh, it's positionless football. So, if I'm not mistaken, Josh Ali, if he's able to make the roster, is a speedster, and it's a guy that you should look out for and being used in a few different ways as well. And again, he's got to make the roster. I think he appeared in a couple of games last year. But so that third receiver spot, it's a fun one for you to bring up. I actually love the fact that you bring it up. I don't think you're wrong on saying, hey, there's going to be a battle there. But I think it's going to be a different battle. That makes sense. I think there's a lot of guys that could fill that role and do different things for you there.
And you bring up a good point too, because really that could, to your point, to piggyback off your point, it could go by kind of what you need that week. Some weeks you may need a guy who is better at taking the top off. So you may see, like you said, more of Scotty Miller, or you could see Ali in that spot. Or maybe you need a bigger guy against a more maybe physical DB, depending on who you're taking on that week. So maybe you do need to see more of a Kadero Hodge, or maybe you do need to see more of a Cordell Patterson, or maybe they have a guy who, is maybe not as good in coverage. So maybe you put a speedier Bijan in the slot. Maybe you see him more in the slot. That goes back to the point of the Falcons being so versatile on offense and having so many guys that can do so many different things. So it could be, like you said, kind of a maybe we say running back committee, maybe a wide receiver 3 by committee, depending on what you need for that week. So that's very interesting that you bring that point up. And I think we could see, like you said, a multitude of different guys kind of fill that role as the season go along, depending on what the Falcons need that week, where it's more of a speedster, more of a possession wide receiver, or things like that. Beau, I do want to bring one more thing up to you as we continue to go through competitions here heading into training camp. Do you have trying to think of the correct word. Do you have a kind of timeline on when Matthew Bergeron should be getting the majority of first team reps? Because it seems like right now he's getting some, but he's not getting the majority. And that's not anything that should be surprising anybody. Arthur Smith, you touched on earlier, is very much a head coach who makes you earn your spot. He's not just going to slot you in there because, you were a first or second round pick, or, you got paid a lot of money, or this, that, and the third. But a lot of people have Matthew Bergeron penciled into that starting left guard spot. Is there a point in training camp, in mandatory mini camp, that Bergeron should take that step and should be in that starting left guard spot and getting most of the reps there?
It's a good question. I think that it's probably something that he'll slowly be worked in during practice and training camp, and maybe during some of the drills. And then I could see him possibly getting, depending on how he's done, possibly getting in there in that first or second game. But I kind of see the method they use a little bit with Jalen, and I don't want to compare him to Jalen Mayfield, but kind of with Jalen Mayfield in the past, where they played him with the first team, and then he stayed and played in them with the second team. And so he gets as many reps in these preseason games as he can to bring him along. I could see something like that with how they bring him along. But look, a lot of it is going to be on what he's doing and how he's working and what progress he's showing. So, yeah, I would say at some point in the preseason, we'll probably see him moved in there more and used more, to be honest with you. I'm not trying to avoid the question, because it's a good question. I just don't know if it's one that it's going to be hard to predict, but I would definitely look for him to be, depending on how he's playing in training camp, moved in and getting some time with the ones. And then look, if he's showing growth and that he can handle that. He'll definitely get in that first preseason game with the ones, but right now he just needs to continue to progress and learn the position. I don't expect him to not be the starter in week one. I expect him to make that transition. I think he's a smart, aggressive player who's good enough to make it. So, if not, then it's a little bit disappointing. But moving forward, he is the guy that I think will be and has the inside track to be the starting left guard.
And look, our timeline might be different and maybe doesn't line up with the timeline that Arthur Smith and Dave Ragone have for him. Look, they might be trying to maybe we're talking about, him being ready for training camp, which I think is very reasonable. I think you would want him starting to get those reps during training camp, but maybe they want him to be sooner, or maybe they won't be as concerned if, it's the second or third preseason game. That might actually be a little late, but you know what I'm saying? The timelines might not add up exactly to what, our timeline is, another fan's timeline is, and what their timeline actually is for Matthew Bergeron when it comes to when he should be getting the majority, the lion's share of first team reps at that left guard position. So, the fact that he's not getting it right now shouldn't be worrisome, even if, he isn't getting the lion's share and mini camp shouldn't be that worrisome. I think you start to, like you said, pay more attention to it when we get into training camp, definitely when we get into the preseason for sure. So we shall see, but definitely the expectation, I think, from everybody, and including Arthur Smith, Dave Ragone, the Atlanta Falcons, is for him to be that starting guy at left guard. But that's going to do it for this edition of Peachtree Football. We will continue to break down position battles as they happen, as they continue to develop throughout OTAs, throughout mandatory minicamp, and definitely throughout training camp and the preseason. Make sure you follow Peachtree Football, download Peachtree Football, subscribe to Peachtree Football. We are wherever you get your podcasts. That is Apple Podcasts, that is Spotify, that is the Audacy app. Follow us on social media at SquidBilly929, at _Dylan Mathews as well for everything Atlanta Falcons and Atlanta sports overall. But again, follow Peachtree Football, download, subscribe to Peachtree Football, comment, subscribe, all that stuff on YouTube as well. And until we talk to you guys next time, peace.